Stocks of major U.S. banks fell today. That's because regulators there are also cracking down on risk-taking by the big banks. The Federal Reserve and two other regulating bodies are proposing that banks hold more cash reserves to cover potential liabilities on their balance sheet. Roza Kazan explains.
Never again will the American taxpayer be held hostage by a bank that is too big to fail.
2.5 years after the U.S. president made that promise, U.S. regulators are finally taking their first big swing at the big banks. The banks that critics say remain too risky 5 years since the financial crisis.
Too big to fail mega banks that put our entire economy at risk.
To make sure that never happens again, U.S. regulators now want top U.S. banks to set aside more capital. Among them, J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Citigroup, the banks with more than $700 billion in assets. The top 8 would have to set aside at least 5% of the value of all the assets they own, including loans, investments, and even buildings, by 2018, or 6% for the subsidiaries. This means that between now and 2018, the banks will have to raise up to $90 billion. And right now, just 2 of the top 8 banks, Wells Fargo and Bank of America, meet the 5% requirement. Critics say the proposal could hurt the broader economy, as banks would have to hold more cash in their coffers and charge high interest rates, which could make it harder to buy a car, get a mortgage, or go to college. But Bloomberg government analyst Katie North believes the regulators have a good comeback.
If you're too big to fail, there's a concern that there will be additional bailouts coming in the future. And regulators are trying to guard against that from happening, because if that did happen, it would further contract the economy even worse, and we'd be right back where we started.
The banks are expected to comment on the rule before it's enacted. It's likely they'll argue that the U.S. Bank will become less competitive, as the global ratio requirement for reserve capital to assets stands at just 3%. Roza Kazan, CCTV, Washington.